Students, during the last class we have learnt about different file objects. Now for today's class we are going to learn about exception handling in Python. Our today's topic is exception handling in Python. As you know, I am K.S.Praneeth Chowdary from the Department of Computer Science of SRR Government Arts and Science College, Karimnagar. What is exception? When does it occur? Are the main important things we have to learn before going to exception handling. So as you look on the screen, an exception is an event which occurs during the execution of a program. This exception disrupts the normal flow of the program's instructions. So remember the thing that an exception is an event that happens to occur during the execution of a program, and this exception disrupts the normal flow of the program's instructions. So when the Python script encounters a situation that it cannot handle with, it raises an exception. So in general words, we see that an exception is a Python object that represents an error. So when a Python script raises an exception, it should either handle the exception immediately, or it should terminate the exception and should quit the program. So during the execution of the program, if there arises an error, that is called as an exception, and Python should handle the exception or the error during the execution time. It must either handle the exception immediately or should terminate the exception and quit the program. Now, how to handle an exception that has arisen? So as we are the code developers, If we have some suspicious code that we think would raise an exception, we can defend our program by placing the suspicious code in a try block. So we look into what is try block in the later slides. But after the try block, we should include an except statement followed by a block of code which handles the problem as elegantly as possible. So the thing to be remembered in today's class is exception is an error that arises during the program execution, and handling that error that has arisen during the execution time is called as exception handling. Either we should handle the exception, or we should terminate the exception and quit the program. So when we see that this program is going to raise an exception, we can defend it by placing the code in try block, and after the try block we should include an except statement followed by a block of code which handles the problem as elegantly as possible. You see an example of handling an exception on the screen. The syntax is given at the first try. There will be a block. If that block is not executed there, then we have exception 1. If there is exception 1, then the exception 1 block is executed. But if exception 1 is not found, then it goes for exception 2, then executes that block. But if there is no exception, then there is a else block there which is executed. So try, then exceptions, then else block. But while using these try block exceptions, we should have some points to remember. A single try statement can have multiple except statements. This is useful when the try block contains statements that may throw different types of exceptions. We can also provide a generic except clause which handles any exception. After the except clause, we can include an else clause. The code in the else block executes if the code in the try block does not raise an exception. The else block is the very good place for code that does not need the try block's protection. Just have a look on the screen to remember the points that we should follow while working with try block. Now we see an example. there is a code with no problem here. Try, that means open the test file in writing mode, and the following string has been written. This is my test file for exception handling. So while writing this string into the test file, if it raises an error, then it prints error can't find file or read data. Here else should be also been given in red letter, but it has been given blue letter here. Else print written content in the file successfully. So here the try block will be executed to test whether there are any exceptions. If there are no exceptions, then the else block will be executed, giving the output as written content in the file successfully. So in this code we see that no exception has been raised, so the else block has been executed. The next thing we see here is code with write permission error. Similarly, in the try block, we open the test file in the read mode, but we are supposed to write something in that file. This is my test file for exception handling. So immediately it raises an exception saying that can't find file or read data. So exception is raised here, so immediately the output will be displayed as error can't find file or read data. You observe the difference between the previous program and this program. There was no exception raised, so the else block was executed. Here there was an exception raised, so else block will be ignored. Now we see an except statement that has no exceptions. This is quite funny here. An except statement with no exceptions. So the try block is there. By default, the try block will be executed. And while executing the try block, if there is any exception, then execute that block. But if there is no exception, then the else block will be executed. This kind of a try except statement catches all the exceptions that occur. Using this kind of try except statement is not considered a good programming because it catches all exceptions but does not make the programmer identify the root cause of the problem that occurs. So do not try to write a program, a code with and except that do not contain exceptions. Now we see an except statement with multiple exceptions here. Try the block to be executed. Then except there are exceptions 1 to n. If there is any exception from the given exception list, then the except block will be executed. But if there are no exceptions in that block, then the else block will be executed. So we see that a program can be developed with an except with no exceptions, and a program can be developed with an exception with multiple exceptions. Now we are going to discuss about the try finally clause. Here we can skip the exceptions. Try the block, exceptions may be skipped, and the finally block will be executed. We can use a finally block along with a try block. The finally block is a place to put any code that must execute. The code that has been put in the finally block should be executed even though there is an exception raised or not. Let us see an example for try finally clause. There the try block is there. Where an execution has started with opening a file named test file with writing mode. Try. This is my test file for exception handling. That sentence should be written in that test file. And finally, going to close the file, fh.close. And the exception there we see that except print error can't find file or read data. When an exception is thrown in the try block, the execution immediately passes to the finally block. After all the statements in the finally block are executed, the exception is raised again and is handled in the exception statement if present in the next higher layer of the try except statement. So dear students, just have a look on all the slides for what we have learned today. The definition of exception. The occurrence of exception. Handling an expression. Handling an exception using try block, including except statement. The syntax for handling an exception. Try, except, else. I repeat, try, except, else. Here we see the points to remember while writing the try block. Next we saw some examples. Code with no problem. Code with the right permission error. Code with no problem enters the else block, whereas code with right permission error enters the except block. Next we see except with no exceptions. Next we learnt about except with multiple exceptions. The try finally clause. Try finally except clauses. Try finally. When an exception is thrown in the try block, the execution immediately passes to the finally block. After all the statements in the finally block are executed, then the exception is raised again and is handled in the except statements, if present, in the next higher layer of the try except statement. So my dear students, thank you all for your silent listening. Remember all the points of today's class. Thank you once again.